It's a high-tech conversation
And a low-tech topic.
live on the World Wide Web via Zoom. Bench Talk 101.
Welcome to Bench Talk 101. Tonight we have Thiago Endrigo Silva, who is talking about Brazilian heritage craft. If you want to ask a question, please ask at the end and raise your hand in the reactions bit. Thiago, over to you.
Hey, Paul. Hi, everyone. Well, it's good to be back. I used to participate in these talks during the pandemic. Then I had to resume working. So it's difficult for me to be here. It's 5:30 now in Brazil, so I'm still working. Actually, it's this is happening during working hours. So I'm glad to see familiar faces and new faces here. Thanks for having me, Paul. Thanks for the invitation. In my first talk, I did talk about myself a little bit too much, so I'm going to be brief here. I am a woodworker based in São Paulo, Brazil. I'm native to Brazil, and I make stuff here in my shop, and I teach children and adults. Actually, teaching is what I do the most these days. Paul invited me because I have written this article for Mortise Tenon magazine. I need to thank them for their research craft grant. I was awarded that grant, and that helped me to continue with this research. It's an ongoing research about the historical processes that actually kind of steal our own country from us, taking a look from the craft perspective. So that article was published in the 16th issue of the magazine. And I also need to thank, besides Mortise Tenon, I need to thank Rubens Matuk and Douglas Lambert for helping me with that article. They took the photographs, and Rubens actually let me take photos of his collection of tools and artifacts. So the article, the idea for the article was a perception we have here that, and something we hear very often, that in Brazil we don't have a tradition when it comes to woodworking, which is really odd because the human presence in this part of the planet is not new. Dating to thousands of years, tens of thousands, depending on how you date that. And we do have archaeological findings that show that people were working wood, and then we have native Brazilians that were here before Portugal, discovered or invented or invaded this land in 1500. These native people have been decimated, as you probably know, but we still have an immense presence of native tribes, native languages that are still spoken among these people, and we still can find things made by these tribes, ethnical groups across Brazil. These things range from tools to canoes to furniture. The native home is not really furnished the way we would furnish our own homes right now. Hammocks have been used extensively, but we do find stools and benches that are very typical to this part of the planet, really. If you're interested about in discovering more about these objects, these pieces of furniture, I would recommend going to the Bay collection. We'll try to put a link in the description here. There you will find benches and stools that are still made in traditional ways, using chainsaws, but also adzes and hatchets, and axes. But the interesting thing is that these objects, they do belong to a different rationale, or a different way to think about the materials and life and furniture. So it's interesting to try to get to know those things. There's also, I'll also ask Paul to put here in the description a link to a documentary about a canoe made from jatoba bark. Jatoba is a native tree to Brazil, and the Mexinaco and the Yalaupiti people make canoes from the bark of the jatoba. As you can imagine, it's a very, very hard, kind of brittle bark, but they managed to make these canoes. So these things, these examples are just to try to introduce the talk here, because in fact, most of the history of Brazilian woodworking is thought of as, starting with the arrival of the Portuguese people here, and craftsmen, really. Portuguese, the colonization was not, the idea of colonization was not centered on settlers, or settling here. Portuguese man came along alone, and not with their families. So the idea was to exploit this land, and but they did end up bringing craftsmen, and the guild system ended up being established in Brazil with some adaptations and differences that lasted from maybe 1549, 50 to 1824. That's when a constitution ended the guild system here. But that system never produced the quantity of workers that you would need to form a class with some political leverage, power, influence. So in Brazil, it seems to us that we are always inventing the wheel. And when we talk about tradition, we usually try to tradition is connected to passing the knowledge along. So the transmission here has been in Brazil very, very poor, discontinuous. So it's really interesting how these things happen, being so diverse with its native people, and also the colonizers from Portugal, and later with the immigration from other parts of Europe. We have in Brazil, in the southern part of Brazil, a very, very important German immigration happening in the 19th century. Italian immigration as well. And those immigrants that came to Sao Paulo, to my state, they brought their ways to work with, their knowledge, and they trained people. But it seems to us that everything is really, if there is a rule, it is discontinuity. That will be the main rule we perceive from our history. So that article and this research is about this. I must say that I'm not a historian nor anthropologist. I am a woodworker, so I'm talking about. No, this is my point of view as a woodworker here in Brazil. But it seems to me that even when we hear that we don't have a tradition, if we try to do kind of an archaeological kind of research, we will find many different traditions scattered all around. I don't know if any of you have this kind of perception on your own history. Things to me seem to be more linear in other parts of the world, but that's what we find here. So in that article, all the photographs, for instance, are of tools. And we have tools from indigenous people, from native Brazilians, gouges made from animal tooth. Uh, and we have tools that were imported from Europe, used in wheel and wagon making, in carpentry and woodworking. And what we see from those tools is that all these traditions are if not alive, present in a way. And that article ends with a picture, a photo, which is not from a tool. It's actually a carving from a Brazilian artist named Velho. That's his nickname, and this carving is from a tree. It's a little tree with little animals, and that was a way to try to address the fact that we as woodworkers we use tools to transform the world, and we do find materials that we take from the world to transform and to make some things that are useful, things that are beautiful, but we put into these things a lot of us, a lot of a lot of our own conceptions about life and the world. So maybe this would symbolically translates to a call to Brazilians, using our own practical intelligence and our creativity to make or to build a country that is actually plurinational and rich and full of traditions. But we need to be able to understand these traditions as our own. I think I have spoken for only 10 minutes, but to make this meeting more conversational, maybe we could go from there. And I would love to hear you guys about questions and remarks you have, you may want to make. And then we can go, we can go from there. What do you think,
Sure.
Paul?
Yeah, I think that works. So does anybody have any questions? And I see that Ian Lambert has a question. You need to unmute, Ian.
Start again. Hi there. I was interested to know whether it was the Portuguese who brought, the metals into Brazil, and before Portugal, were the native people using stone, steel, flints, whatever? That's the question.
All right. Hi there. Yes, as far as I know, yes, metal tools were imported. The indigenous people were using stone. and animal teeth as tools. As far as I know, metal tools came with the Portuguese colonizers, and then many of our tools, tools that we still find here, are were made and came from Britain, really, from the UK. There was a big commerce between Brazil and England. Um, that was actually one of the reasons that slavery ended in Brazil. Was not for humanitarian reasons; they were commercial reasons. And England was pushing for colonization to stop. Portugal was still making a profit from it, and it ended because of the commercial trade. It was damaging that trade. So importing goods was a decision from the Brazilian. At that time, Brazilian Empire, if I'm not mistaken, Brazil went from colony to empire and then to republic. The emperor was Peter first, Pedro I, who was the king's son. So there was a bit of a tumultuous history. But yes, as far as I know, Ian, that was metal tools were important from Europe.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
How many years have you been working on this, Thiago? Researching this history?
Oh, maybe 4 or 5 years. Yeah, a little bit more.
Yeah.
For me, it was when I started working wood maybe 20 years ago. And when I started, a friend of mine taught me how to use machines. And this guy was amazing. It was amazing what he could do, but he couldn't sharpen. He used no hand tools at all. And learning how to use machines was good, because Brazilian our native woods are very hard and dense usually. So using machines, that's kind of helpful. But it was also very frustrating because I didn't have those machines. I didn't have that well-equipped shop. So having access to the knowledge and then being able to develop skills to use hand tools was very liberating. Very, maybe just believe that if you have skills, you can work with anything under any circumstances. So when I started, it was difficult to find someone to learn from, and then only after a few years I started finding old masters, but that was partly because they were not like on the spotlight. They were not. It was difficult to find these people because they're not recognized as masters. They're not recognized for the knowledge they have. So it was only after a few years into this that I became aware of the people that would they did know how to work wood, and they were fantastic. But being a country that had slave trade had ended officially in 1888, and manual labor was not very well thought of. We don't give a lot of value to that kind of work, and that persists until today. So when I made the change, I'm a psychologist. I went to university to study psychology. When I changed from psychology to becoming a woodworker, that brought some concerns to my family. But it was only later that I could find people that could work. Matthias has a question. I think he has his hand raised.
Oh, thank you.
Yep. So I was wondering, do you see? So I mean, obviously, every place to some extent has its own flavor of things, but Brazil is, of course, is a huge country, sitting in a very large continent. Do you, as it were, distinguish regionalisms in the things you're studying, and do you see Brazil as similar to the other parts of other countries in South America, or in the Americas in general, or how much do you detect distinctiveness, and how much do you detect things being basically just small variations on the same thing that you get everywhere, if you see what I mean?
Yes. Well, thank you for the question. Tough question,
Yes.
because you look and lay your eyes on. In furniture making, there is a very famous trend here. Maybe I shouldn't call it a trend, but the modern Brazilian furniture has made an impact here for us, as a time when the designers came to the scene, and they were making, they were using Brazilian woods, and we can perceive originality there. Influences for sure from other parts of the world, but we can recognize the modern Brazilian furniture movement as original. But then, again, we're looking at designers, and I'm in love with furniture that was made not by designers, made by the people.
Yes.
And we can, when we look to those things, those artifacts, it's interesting because we can see things that are very, very original and also very similar. To other pieces of furniture from around the world, because solutions, joinery solutions are similar in a way, and even style. We have staked furniture here in Brazil that I doubt that had any one of these guys. I don't think they ever read Christopher Schwartz, or went to a European museum. But we do find those things with a flavor, sometimes resources are sometimes scarce here in Brazil. So ingenuity plays a big role when you look to that. Brazilian vernacular furniture. In the native or the indigenous furniture, what you see is in a very zoomorphic kind of furniture. So we have stools that look like small animals, and they are carved. And that is very, very beautiful, because they can fell a tree and carve it in the woods, and then they will remove the bulk of the material there, and then they will take that piece, which is significantly lighter, to their villages, and then they continue to work and refine that, which is interesting. What I think it's interesting is that you have like a four-legged animal made into or turned into a stool with a wood carved, and then you have the torso, and you have the legs, and that will form the seat of the stool and the legs. But then we also have furniture that doesn't look like any animal, but it's made the same way. It's, carved stool that looks assembled. And that is, those things are fascinating. I cannot still, talk more about these things, but it's really interesting. So trying to answer your questions. I do think it's particular. Brazil is very particular because we are in South America, but we speak Portuguese.
Yes.
We don't speak Spanish.
Yep.
But we do share indigenous tribes with contiguous countries. Those influences are still perceivable to a certain degree, but again, it's a globalized world, and we have influences coming from everywhere. But yeah, I think there is a Brazilian flavor to the things we make. I still owe you. I need to work on this, but I think a very, very good analogy of crafts in Brazil could be made with football. Because it's the same sport, but we do have national styles that do convey a lot of our own culture in the way that we play and how we think the sport. So I'll come back with that. with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So what else can you tell us, Thiago?
What else can I tell you? Wow. I was going through this article earlier today, and one thing I may want to add. Really, I'm trying to find this here in the article. Let me see. No, I'm not going to find it right now. Sorry. But yeah, on that same note, about the national style, and if there's anything that's particular to Brazil, I think that it would be really interesting if we could find what am I trying to say here. Let me listen to the questions first. I'll try to formulate this better.
Aha. So we have Rusty with a question.
Yeah. Hey, Thiago, can you talk about the timbers that are available there versus what's available, let's say, in Europe or North America? The three timbers, I mean, Jatobá is the one I know the best because I work with it. Ipe I've seen but have not worked with. And I hear Brazil wood was a big exporting item early on. I'm not sure if it still exists or not. But what other timbers that are in use now by, say, professionals or hobbyists, and how they relate to the timbers available here?
Yeah, Brazil would also known as Pernambuco is a state here in Brazil. That's where a lot of this wood was founded, and the port where in Pernambuco is where this was being exported. The Pau Brazil is the only country I know of that has its name from a tree. It was named after that tree. The Brazil is not the first name of this country, and that trade that was the first economical cycle, as far as I know, here. The exploitation of Brazil wood. It was not used as timber; it was used as a dye. It gives you a very, very rich red dye. It was only in the maybe 18th century to 19th, maybe, that a archetier founded that you could make violin bows using Pernambuco, and that wood was the basswood to make this kind of object. The violin, the viola, cello bows. It has the perfect balance weight, flexibility for that use. So we can still find it, but it's very controversial. We don't really know if it's always legal. We cannot find that wood to in regular in my regular wood store here. You can find it for violin bows. It's difficult to cultivate that. That tree needs certain conditions to grow. It's really difficult to have that in a plantation. But yeah, we do eventually come across Brazil wood. Brazilian rosewood is another wood that another species that is very valued. It's beautiful. It's used for in guitar making, extensively. It's great for guitar sides and backs and fretboards. We do have jatobá. Jatobá is common. It's used in furniture making and spoke sheath making, and woods that we use are similar to jatobá very frequently. I'm making a workbench now in Garapira, which is pretty much has pretty much the same density and hardness. Sucupira is another wood, a very, very hard, dense wood. I don't know if you're familiar with Sucupira. James Krenov mentions Sucupira in one of his books because he received some of it, a little, maybe a plank or two from a friend. So we do use these woods in furniture making. We also use things that are lighter. Mahogany is common here, very, very difficult to find. Spanish cedar is found. Spanish cedar is not Spanish, of course. It's native to Brazil. We find it. We can still use it. There is one species of conifer here in Brazil, which is the Paraná pine, Araucaria. We can find it eventually. Frejó is another word. Then there are, very many different names of medium density hardwoods. Wood here is not usually that straight as what you would find in Europe or the US, maybe. Interlock drain is found usually, but yeah, I think these are the main species that we use.
Thank you. So if you were to build a chair, what would you use?
Oh, good question. I have been using Jequitibá. Jequitibá works fine. It's difficult to find. Well, I'm in a city. It's difficult for me to find greenwood, so I'm not. I don't know if you're thinking about greenwood chairs. Finding
Anything that
greenwood is
bends.
difficult. Anything that bends, yeah, that's tricky. I'm doing that research with friends here. It's difficult to find wood that bends well and that we can have a good supply, continuous supply of it. Pau marfim bends well, but it's not that easy to find. The Spanish cedar doesn't bend at all.
Really?
What else? Yeah, no, that's really tough. We have been trying all sorts of different methods, using a strap, without strap, leaving for in
Soaking
box for
first.
like an hour
Yeah.
or 2 hours, soaking first, using a fabric softener, all that is going into that research. It's difficult to find wood with straight grain that bends well in Brazil.
Okay.
There's a famous species called açoita-cavalo, Luea, that's the genus, but that's not plentiful where I am.
Mhm.
São Paulo is in a part of Brazil that has Mata Atlântica, which is a very, very important forest that has been reduced to maybe, I don't know, 5-10% of what it was. So finding wood from this part of the country is difficult because we have decimated, we have deforested. Deforestation was a big thing here. So my state is the biggest consumer of Amazonian wood in the country. We have been buying wood from the rainforest up there, in the Amazon, which is about 5,000 kilometers from here. Not really that sustainable. Furniture making is not the biggest buyer. The construction is, but yeah, trying to find a good chair wood in this part of the country is a concern.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And next we will go to Will Graham.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi, hello.
What with all the stuff you're doing with the natives is what do you want to what would you like to get done next? Where do you want to take it?
Oh, I don't know if I understand the question, but for us, if I understand it, it's difficult for us in Brazil to recognize that we Brazilians have been making stuff, and these things are full of creativity, beauty, and resourcefulness, and are available to us for our appreciation. We sometimes look too much in other directions when we have these folks here making incredible things in a way that's more sustainable and very, very creative. So if there's one agenda for me when I try to display these crafts, and when I try to understand the techniques, is to find what is common here, what constitutes a Brazilian craft, even though they were here before this term Brazil was invented. I don't know if I answered your question.
I think you did, and one other thing is you're obviously a woodworker, but how do you see woodworking as a common skill set in the Brazilian community coming along as a modern thing as well?
Wow.
Is there a lot of interest in woodworking?
Not really. No, not really. It's a hard way to make a living. And again, manual labor is not something that a mom or dad would dream for their kids to go into, because it's difficult. For me, what it has given me was a way to be connected to who I am, and to find a job, an occupation that could contribute to my community, making things in a way that I wouldn't be serving any big corporation, in a way that I could be in touch with my own creativity and the materials that I use, in a way that would could be sustainable. So working with my hands, we say working with the hands, but we are working with our brains, hands, feelings, all that goes into this. You know this very well. So being connected was something that I was trying to find really in work. Um, Not that I wasn't connected working as a clinical psychologist, but I needed the material aspect of it too. When I do have many students, and this is one thing many students come looking, because sometimes they do have in their own work they face that this disconnection, the disengagement, and when we work with our hands, uh, you know, it's different. You end up making something for someone, you learn from someone, you get to use a tool made by someone, or you make a tool for someone, and then you can have commissions, you can accept commissions, and then you transform the physical world around you and your community. So that kind of engagement was something I was looking for. I don't think it's a very popular career choice right now. Technical education in this field is very complicated. We do have education for woodworking, but that's for the industry. You wouldn't learn sharpening there. You would learn how to work with the computer and the CNC and sheet goods, because that's where you would find work in the industry. Um, but there is a resurgency in this kind of activity in Brazil lately, because I think that we moved far from the material aspect of existence, and I think that being able to maybe play an instrument or cook or do woodworking is part of is a big part of life, and it certainly changes your life when you do it.
That's good.
Okay, and next we'll go to Chester.
There, I've unmuted. It's a very interesting topic. I didn't read the article, so I don't know how in depth you went, but I have curiosities about why am I spotlighted? I have curiosities about some comparisons here. I'm Colombian by heritage, and Colombia has a rich recorded history of furniture from pre-Columbian all the way through, but they have a distinctive style, particularly in their primitive work, that you can look at and very well and very easily say that's Colombian versus Argentinian or Brazilian, or in that sense. I don't get that feeling about Brazil so much, possibly because it was less studied and less recorded. But I do know that Brazil, and this is another question for you, I don't know if you delved into it, Brazil was one of the last countries to dissolve slavery as well. That was the 1880s. And as well, it also was a slave trade, in the slave trade prior to the Portuguese invasion, so to speak, of Brazil. So the tribes themselves would enslave other people in other tribes, as well as Afrikaners that came over. So my questions are twofold. One, did slavery, has anybody done a study on whether or not the slave trade was used in any kind of a woodworking trade? And did it make some contribution to that, to the history of woodworking in Brazil? Number two, in the 20th century, Brazil was really quite prolific in furniture manufacturing, but more on a company scale. In other words, there were a great many designers, Portuguese designers in the 1900s, 1950s, 60s, 70s, that were producing really interesting variations on themes. And by that, I mean, it seems to me that Colombia furniture is distinctively Colombian, but Brazilian furniture tends to be either European in derivation or some variation of it. A lot of Danish modern, a lot of what we call mid-century furniture seems to have been produced in that period. And so, so the question is, do you have any knowledge about how slavery affected woodworking? And as well, is there a reason that the Brazilian furniture isn't as distinctive as, say, Colombian or Mexican? Just throw that out. It's a lot, I know.
Hey, Chester.
Hey,
Nice to see you.
nice to see you as well.
Thanks for your question. I remember you had like Cuban heritage. Is your father
Cuban,
from
Colombian.
Cuba or something?
Yeah, my family came from Spain to Jamaica,
from
Jamaica to Cuba, Cuba to
Nice.
South
Yeah,
America.
I
And I think the woodworking
here.
varies between
Okay.
those countries.
Sure. Yeah. Yes. I agree. Yeah, I didn't remember about the Colombian. Yeah, that you were born there. Great. I don't know much about the furniture styles in Colombia, but I do think there's there is an interpretation about the colonization here that when Spaniards went to Central America and South America, they did find different organizations. The native people were like organized differently. In Central America, you have nation-like, almost empires, really, with a very distinct aesthetic and belief, form of government. And I think that influence is what you find is, when you think about traditional pre-discovery, pre-invasion kind of, style. In Brazil, everything was more scattered, I think. There is an anthropologist that discusses this fact extensively. His name is Darcy Ribeiro. I can send you some of his texts if you want. Yeah, I think that that's one thing. In Brazil, we didn't have like a sort of a nation-like organization of our people before the colonization. So yeah, we have different styles, and yeah, and then slavery, yes, ended in 1888. That's when the law prohibiting the slave trade was made. We still find work in conditions that are very analogous to slavery to this day. So Brazil didn't really suffer any deep change from colony to empire to republic. There has been a continuum, and Brazil is very unequal as a country and very racist too. Even if you don't realize it. So if you think about the things that people brought here from Africa, what they made, it's pretty much everything.
Yeah,
I'd say, because they were in charge of making stuff, really, because the elite from Portugal hated working. So, and they had this they thought that, everything that's manual labor should be left to, someone else to do. If you have someone, that's a person that was, able to become a free person, that person would think twice before, trying to find an occupation, because changing class, if you remain a manual labor, that is not really, you're not really changing. And so manual labor has a very negative connotation here in Brazil. Still, that has changed, but we are still connected to that racist history.
Yeah.
So
I think that's
the black hands have built this country.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point to bring into it of the class system, and the idea that different forms of governance allowed a hierarchy of people to enjoy the work of others, and perhaps only a rare person, as well in the United States. You always found it, or I always found it interesting when there was somebody of great wealth or great heritage, for lack of a better word, when they all of a sudden found themselves really interested in doing woodworking or doing some of the primitive arts or painting or anything else. That was always more of what we created as a name for that was hobby woodworking and that sort of thing. But it's interesting, the variety of these cultures, and I think that probably is the prime difference, is that class system that they lived under. Also, you don't hear a lot about gold in Brazil, whereas Colombia and Peru, the Spanish came in and their prime motivation was in taking slaves and gold, as opposed to furnishings or boats or lumber, later lumber. But I think all of that ties into it. I think it's a fascinating subject. And thank you for putting on this presentation.
Oh no, please. On the contrary, yes. We did have one of the economic cycles where was gold, actually, because there's a province, there's a state here called Minas Gerais, the general mines, and a lot of gold was found there, and also in other parts of Brazil, and that was we find in Brazil, but also in Portugal, entire churches filled with gold, all like veneered in gold, and that is Brazilian. Diamonds too, but mainly gold was found here.
And I suppose woodworking didn't survive the same way that clay artifacts or gold artifacts or iron artifacts survived longer than the wood. But you do find some old Colombian tools still, and the same in Mexico. But I'm not aware of a lot of tooling, like planes or things like that survived in Brazil. But as you say, there was an archaeologist that did some studies on that. I'd love to get a connection to that, more information on that.
Sure. Yeah. I'll send it to you.
Lovely.
So one thing which you mentioned, Thiago, was the fact that people made actual things in the forest and then partly completed them, brought them out. Now, did they actually bring them out and then allow them to dry to finish them off, or would they work them a lot green?
They would put the finishing touches when the wood was somewhat dry, because they today they use sandpaper and files, and they paint. Each ethnical group has their own style of painting, and their motifs, and they're very, very specific. One group cannot copy the other. And they do have meanings. So they do paint that. You will find a little bit about this process, Paul, in that link that I just sent here on the chat, about the Bay collection. Bay is a collection of stools and benches. And if you go to videos, you will see them working on some of these benches. You will find axes and machete. Machete is a very, very common green woodworking tool here in Brazil. We do a lot of things with the machete. So they work the wood green, away from their homes, from their village. When they go into the forest, perhaps an hour, 2, 3 hours away, and then they do most of the work there because these logs are so heavy, they couldn't carry it. And then they bring stuff home, and then they finish it when it's I wouldn't say dry by today's European or American standards, but it would be roughly around 15-20%, I think, humidity.
Thank you for that.
That was
Thank you.
interesting. The machete in Colombia had several uses. It had a thick back to it, so that they would use it to split off fibers of wood, almost like we use a froe, as well as they would use the point of it to drill by turning it, and they would use the back of it as a scraper to smooth. So it was a more complicated tool than we give it credit for, as just clearing jungle. They used it in a lot of different ways. In Colombia, I don't,
Yeah, they're sure. No, yes. I think it's similar. When it's a very, very useful tool. It's a big knife.
Yeah.
It has many uses, and indigenous people have been using it in many different ways. There are instruments that are made. There's the viola de coxo. There's one ecosystem in Brazil called Pantanal. In central Brazil, there's this flooded area called Pantanal. And in Pantanal, there's a musical instrument that's typical from that part of Brazil called the viola de coxo. Coxo is the dugout log where you put food for animals. That's the coxo. And the viola de coxo is a guitar-like instrument that is dug out, and then you just glue the soundboard on. But the neck and the body, that's one piece of wood, and you make the box by just hollowing out the body of the instrument. That instrument is made with, of course, an adze to dug out, but the outside is entirely made by machete, and it's beautiful to see because folks that make this instrument, they are so skilled.
Is that similar to a guitar instrument? Is it a string instrument you're talking about?
It is a string instrument, usually 4 or 5 strings, similar to a guitar, a bit smaller. More like the size of a tenor guitar, perhaps.
What's generally used for the strings? Just regular guitar strings, or historically?
I'm sorry.
Well, over here, historically, for strings, we used to use catgut. So I just wondered what would have been used for the strings?
Oh, fish line has been used, and normal guitar strings adapted to their tunings is also used. Anything that would stretch and maintain a pitch has been used. Wire has been used. Yeah, there's an interesting connection because this is a European form. This is this Viola Coxa, this guitar. The influence for Portugal is noticeable. And then we find that in Brazil we have the cavaquinho. Cavaquinho is a even smaller instrument tuned with wire strings, metal strings, steel strings, very high pitched, used for melody and also rhythm and harmony. Beautiful instrument. We play cavaquinho in samba and choro. And there's a similar instrument called machete. And the Portuguese machete was brought to Hawaii, and that ended up, giving the ukulele. So there's we find interesting connections there. That's what I was thinking about when I mentioned that we have very distinctive and similar things that we can find. That's that's one of those things.
Does anybody have any further questions for Thiago?
Only thanks.
Yeah, I did find it
Please,
very
thank you.
interesting. Thanks, Thiago.
Well, I'd just like
Thank
to.
you. Again, this is an ongoing ongoing research. Thank you so much for letting me talk to you about these things. Because a lot of there's a lot of progress that comes from being able to talk about this to someone, and I hope that has aroused your interest in Brazilian culture and handicrafts. So thank you so much for having me again.
Well, thank you so much for sort of agreeing to come on for my invitation, because you're always interesting, and with technically a few glitches with the actual stability of the line, but I think we came through well enough. So as I say, I do appreciate you taking the time out to come, and hopefully you'll be able to join us for a couple more before work resumes.
Sure, yeah. I'd love to, yes.
So,
yeah.
without further ado, I think we raise a glass to Thiago, absent friends, and the bench.
Absent friends on the bench.
Thiago, absent friends, and the bench.
Thank you. I'll grab a glass for myself soon. So,